Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in from across the continent for another super exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. Many of you are joining us for the very first time today, and so welcome in. New school year, we're almost wrapping up September together. If you are joining us for the first time, we're all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And everything we do goes to our YouTube channel. So if you want to check out this program in like 3 weeks or 3 years, or like 4,000 other programs, they're all right there to explore and discover, featuring some of the coolest scientists and explorers on planet Earth. And of all days, I'm so glad you're catching us today, because today it's a little bittersweet. We are wrapping up one of my favorite series we've ever done, our third series in collaboration with the amazing folks at If Then. Now, If Then showcases and celebrates the most amazing women in science and exploration on planet Earth. It's the single best campaign of any kind we have ever partnered with. I can't wait for you to check it out. So much there. Now, specifically, we wanted to partner with them to highlight their ambassadors of conservation. In like a week and a half, it is the World Conservation Congress. All the nature nerds in the world are getting together in Abu Dhabi to chart a future for wildlife on this planet. So we wanted to feature 10 of the most amazing conservationists, storytellers, filmmakers, and more to blow your mind with the magic of the natural world. And we are wrapping up in style with our speaker today. Dr. Jenny Adler is joining us yet again. She's a National Geographic photojournalist, storyteller, and beyond. She has traveled to some of the most remote and amazing places on this planet to document the wildlife and ecosystems therein. And so today, she's going to be talking about a particularly special ecosystem, kelp forests, the jungles of the sea, as it were. Really, really biodiverse and special places. My dream diving destination as a diver. I can't wait to go there one day. And universally, when we talk to divers, the place they most like to dive is kelp forest, which is pretty wild. So without further ado, you're not here to hear from me. I'm going to zip it. Jenny, welcome to the broadcast again, and thank you so much for coming back to us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You snuck this in the nick of time. You've had a very eventful month and a bit. You just got married recently, which is so exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Are you off on expedition somewhere soon as well? Is there somewhere you're off to in the next few weeks? Or
I'm actually teaching science journalism at Brown this semester. So I'm here. I'm around for the next couple of months until heading to Antarctica in December.
Of course, as one does, of course. Well, I hope you have a marvelous time. I hope the students are great. And as I said, without further ado, if you want to dive in with your presentation, I know you've got a lot to share with us. So feel free to bring it up and we'll get underway.
Awesome. How does it look?
It looks amazing. I mean, look at that place. How cool is that? Take us away.
Awesome. Well, you can see one of my favorite creatures here. This is a seal, kind of stalking us in Baja. Sometimes they are kind of playing red light, green light with you underwater because they want to check you out, but they might be a little scared. So we're going to talk today about sea forests. As Jesse mentioned, it's really just the most incredible place to dive. And what makes up these forests is kelp. And Madame Fuis was helping me learn how to say kelp in French. Do any of her students want to try to say it in French?
Ooh, Madame Fuis, if you want to unmute your mic, we can see what kelp is en français. Feel free to flick it on. And if you're having any tech troubles, we can always come back to the end and try it then. But it's so nice to have you guys here in Ottawa and our virtual elementary school and Robinson Secondary as well. Everyone's pouring in. I think we might have to wait for that one, Jenny. It's not working, but we'll come back.
Well, she was teaching me how to say it, so I'm really excited. The scientific name for this species of kelp is Macrocystis pyrifera, and that's what makes up a lot of these forests that we swim in. This is another species of kelp called bull kelp, but what can be kind of confusing, and the reason why we have scientific names, is there are actually a couple different species of bull kelp that all have that same common name. And so this one's called Nereocystis, and this is common on the coast of California, specifically kind of starting around Big Sur and moving north from there. So who can tell me what kelp are on this list? Are they plants, animals, algae, or fungi?
All right, so this is the first of a couple questions. If you guys want to chime in the chat, YouTube, StreamYard, what do we think? We had this a version of this the other day with coral reefs, where it was, are they basically animal, vegetable, or mineral? And everybody got it wrong, and that was kind of fun. So I'm very curious what we should hear. Plants we've got algae. Plants and algae are our answers. No one thinks they're animals, and no one thinks they're fungi, that's correct. They're neither of those things, but tell us a little more.
Yeah, they are neither. So if you guess algae, you're right. They really do look like plants, which is quite confusing. So if you guess that, it's like sort of obvious why you would think that, because they look like a plant that grows underwater, but it's actually an algae, which I find so cool. So it's a macro algae, which just means big algae, because sometimes you might think of algae as being like little tiny green stuff, like an algal bloom in the water, still algae, but a different type. So kelp actually lines about 25 to 30% of our coastlines worldwide, and it likes temperate waters, which means cooler waters. It thrives in these kind of water that maybe you wouldn't get visited as much as a coral reef because it's a little bit colder. And so these are just the different genuses or genera of kelp that exist around different coasts. So you can tell they don't really exist near the equator because it's too warm there. So it does look like a plant, but like I said, this is Nereocystis, and it is an algae that grows underwater. And this species particularly is my favorite one, and it thrives in these very kind of rough ecosystems. Whenever I swim with it, I kind of feel a little bit like I'm swimming in a washing machine. This is a wave coming over into a tide pool. So these are the parts of the kelp. So what might look like a leaf on a plant, or they're actually called blades. The stem of a plant, what looks like the stem, is called a stipe. What you would think of as kind of the roots are called a holdfast. And so they don't actually grab nutrients from the ground and bring them up a plant. Like the kelp is, all the cells in the kelp are just absorbing nutrients, and all of them can photosynthesize, not just the blades. And then the nematocyst or bladder is this like air-filled sort of bulb that keeps the kelp actually floating, because if it's too close to the bottom, it can't photosynthesize, right? So it stands up and tries to grow towards the light, just like a tree. So I have been working in these ecosystems for the past 3 years, and I've swam in kelp forests on almost every continent. They're every continent besides continental Antarctica, but on subantarctic islands, there are kelp forests. This happens to be one from South Georgia Island, which is not the state of Georgia or the country of Georgia. It's actually an island near the Falkland Islands, just north of Antarctica. So this water here is actually just above freezing. If you've heard of seaweed, kelp is actually a type of brown seaweed. And for scientific purposes, they would say it's in the order Laminaria. So if you were thinking, oh, I've heard of that looks like a seaweed, it is a seaweed, a specific type of seaweed. So this is another view of the kelp forest in South Georgia. And as you can see here, there's a sea star, and it's, besides sequestering carbon, so they uptake carbon dioxide when they photosynthesize, and can be this incredible storehouse for carbon, especially with climate change happening so quickly. And I want you to think for a second about the habitat that's here, right? It creates this 3D structure. These macrocystis forests here, these giant kelp forests in South Georgia, were some of the biggest and healthiest we've seen anywhere in the world. And it's partially because there's 8 people that live on this island. It's tiny. There's a research station and nothing else, and it's in the middle of the ocean. So there's not very many human impacts here, and the water is very, very cold. Kelp cannot thrive in warm water, so in places where the water is warming, the kelp forests aren't doing as well once the temperature reaches a certain threshold. But besides that, these are actually incredible ecosystems and homes for many different species. So you can think about, if we were to cut down a forest on land, what would happen? The animals would either move or die, right? Same thing with a kelp forest. When a kelp forest disappears, the animals either kind of die or move somewhere else in the ocean. What else, other than the sea star or the kelp, what else do you think lives in a kelp forest?
Ooh, let's see. And again, the chat is your friend here. So if you're in any of our live classes, YouTube classes, anyone, you can share in the chat. We highlighted the seal earlier, so that's an answer that came in. We've got fish of all kinds, depending on what we're keen on, and we can talk about some of these, maybe show some of these later. Sharks, perhaps. I know I've seen sharks in kelp forests before, so that's a great answer. And then I'm going to do a special plug. I don't know if you're going to get to this in your presentation, but sea urchins and otters is like a great story with kelp if you're ever keen. It's one of my very favorite things in all of biology. So some great answers, guys.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of things live in kelp forests. They're extremely biodiverse. One of my favorites, which is on the first slide, this is actually a baby harbor seal, not just a harbor seal. My fins are, I mean, they're a normal size fin. I don't know. This is a tiny seal, and yes, it's real. This is a bigger seal, leopard seal. This lives in Antarctica in South Georgia. This is in another kelp forest in South Georgia. There's also sea lions, which are related to seals, but a little bit different. They have these like external ear flaps that you can see. And some of these are actually also baby sea lions. This is off of La Jolla in San Diego. So these are kind of what you would think of as what scientists or people call the charismatic megafauna. So the bigger things, right? When you're out there, you might see whales. Some of you mentioned, there are sharks. There are many different species of sharks that live in and around kelp forests. There's all of these pinnipeds, which are, seals and sea lions and stuff like that. And they're very playful and very cute to interact with in the water. But there's also smaller things. These are called mellibees, and they're a type of nudibranch or a hooded nudibranch that come out a certain time of year. They just started coming out a week or two ago. And a fun fact about these is that when you bring them above water, which like you shouldn't do, but when scientists do to study them, they smell like watermelon Jolly Ranchers. Some of the other things that live in kelp forests might look kind of crazy. These on the top left are Matridium anemones. I think they look like cauliflower. The middle are sea dragon. To the right is a hula skirt siphonophore. There are jellies. There are sea stars, which you talked about. And then my favorite nudibranch of all times. Nudibranch means naked gills. So it's basically a snail without a shell, kind of. And this one is called the Hopkins rose. And it looks like a piece of like double bubble gum to me. And so they're really fun to find. They come out kind of around February in Monterey. So there are these incredibly like colorful and biodiverse places that kind of tend to get often are overlooked because kelp forests can be cold and dark, and not everyone swims in them. There are a lot of people who do, but I think way more people have probably swam on a coral reef. So what can we do with these photos after I take them, right? So I go out. I'm actually a scientist by training. I have a PhD in ecology, and I kind of fulfill this different part of science, which gets sometimes glazed over a little bit. In this part of science is communication. So all of this work happens in science, and then sometimes it goes and sits in peer-reviewed journals, and those are often read by other scientists, and they're pretty full of jargon, and sometimes they're behind a paywall, right? So you need to be part of an institution or pay to get access to the article. What I do is I take these photos and this work, and I communicate it in a way that more people can understand. So you as students or people in the general public who don't happen to be scientists or don't happen to be on this expedition. So this photo you can see here goes from this, and it actually made the cover of Scuba Diving magazine. So I'm what is called a photojournalist. And so it's basically a journalist. So your photos are truthful. You wouldn't use AI. You would only do a certain number of edits with like, color and sharpness and contrast and stuff like that, but you would never add or take anything away from the image. So you're basically a documentary photographer. You're taking pictures of what's happening and trying to show what it looks like in real life. You wouldn't, change the background or anything like that. So again, because these kelp forests are really cold and often remote, this one, we might've been the first people to ever dive in this kelp forest. This was an important story to tell, right? Like this place exists. But the thing is with kelp forests, and what a lot of my work focuses on, is that these ecosystems are actually quite threatened, and a lot of them are disappearing. So this is a kelp forest off of Baja. And one cool fact about kelp is you see how in the other pictures from South Georgia, there are these big stands of kelp, but they're really thick, and many of them together. This is a newer kelp forest. See how there's like single strands of kelp going up? So this is like new growth forest, which is amazing. But what's happening in a lot of these places is that they're going from this to this. So Jesse, a few minutes ago, mentioned the otters and the urchins. And so I'm going to tell you a story that's similar to otters and urchins and is related, but it's a little bit different because it's with another species that you would not expect. So what happened here was the same story with the otters. So the thing that eats the urchins is gone, or there are a lot fewer of them. And so what happens when you have this predator that's missing from the ecosystem is that its prey just explodes. You can think of these sea urchins basically as like cows in a field full of grass. They're just going to go out and mow it down. Sea urchins love kelp. They love it. They're a natural part of the ecosystem. They're not invasive. It's just once you take away their predator, there's nothing to eat them. And so they just kind of go wild. So what else would eat a sea urchin other than an otter? So in these ecosystems, a lot of them in like California, the otters were extirpated. We killed them during the fur trade. There's not a lot of them left. There are still otters now that are coming back. But what else do you think eats sea urchins? Like, what do you think of when you think of a predator? Because I know for me, I would think of like a leopard or a lion. What are some other examples of predators you all can think of?
Sea urchins being eaten by a leopard. They'd be so surprised. They would just be truly shocking for them on the seafloor under there. What do we think of predators, guys? So yes, crabs. Okay.
Yeah, crabs.
It's funny when I think of crabs as a person who watched way too much Blue Planet, I always think of they're like the base of every food chain. Like everything goes for crabs. They just look so delicious. But yes, they do eat things. We've got sharks again.
Sharks.
The classic ocean predator.
Certainly predators.
Yeah, big fish again. Lots of big fish. I love things like parrotfish, which everybody should look up when they're done because they're magnificent and wonderful. I don't know if they eat sea urchins, but they're super cool. Those are some of our answers, Jenny. That's a good start, I think.
Well, what I would never think of, I would think of a shark personally, but is a sea urchin, a sea star. A sea star eats sea urchins. And so the story here is that Pycnopodia helianthoides, we talked about scientific names a minute ago. They're made up of like largely Latin roots. So Pycnopodia means dense feet. So you can see how many little tube feet it has. And then helianthoides means sunflower-like. So the common name is a sunflower star. And to me, these are just adorable. They look fluffy. They have all of these legs. I think some people might think they're creepy, but I think they're amazing. And they're kind of known as, the reason why I put that cheetah there is that they're known as sort of the cheetahs of the intertidal, because they actually are quite fast and quite voracious predators. So what happened, unfortunately, was that starting in 2013, so about 10 years ago, they went from this to this. This disease called sea star wasting disease that scientists just very recently, like 2 months ago, found out that it's caused by Vibrio, the same thing that causes cholera. It's a different species of Vibrio, but it causes their arms to twist. They develop lesions, and eventually the sea star goes from this to like this. It essentially melts. And so the Nature Conservancy did a report in 2022 and found that 90% of these sunflower sea stars died from this disease. And they're now in 2020 were listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. What I want to show you here is what would be like in a scientific article. So this is by one of my colleagues, Josh Smith. And so in 2021, he published this paper. And what it's showing is that soon the otters started to come back, but the sea urchin population is still skyrocketing, and that's because the Pycnopodia, or the sunflower sea star population, collapsed. So you can see the bottom two graphs. When the sunflower sea stars collapsed, the urchins exploded and just mowed down the kelp forest. And so otters and sunflower stars basically are both keystone predators in the system, keystone species. And so that means that when you remove that, the rest of the system basically breaks down. And so this is in like very nice scientific form. You know, it's not in like scary graphs, but in nice scientific form what happened. But like I showed you earlier, it's also easier to see in photos sometimes. This is what it looks like when a sunflower sea star is hunting. So you can see that like your idea of maybe a sea star on a rock plastered there not moving is quite wrong when it comes to sunflower stars, because they are, to me, this is fast. I know it just looks like slow motion, but I mean, it's not, it's really moving. And this urchin is kind of running for its life right now. And so you can see they have, anyone also who told you that that sea stars have 5 arms was leaving out the coolest species of sea stars, I think. So it's coming after it. I don't remember if it gets it on this one. For some reason, it touches it and its arm is like, ah. But what they'll do is they'll take this sea urchin to its mouth, which is kind of in the middle of the star on the bottom, and it will actually avert its entire stomach onto the sea urchin, basically dissolve it, and then it spits out a perfect version of the sea urchin's test, which is just like the hard shell-like part that's underneath its spine. So it like sucks out all the guts. And so if you're looking for sunflower stars in the wild, you can look for these perfect white sea urchin tests around to see where they've been living. So what I did was I went out in the field with scientists that were studying these sea stars, and also visited a lot of labs throughout the United States in places where they're actually raising baby sea stars, these unexpected predators, to put out into the ocean eventually. So this is a link to QR code to link to the article for those of you who are interested in reading the whole thing. And I published it in Box maybe 2 years ago, year and a half ago. And this at the time was the first sunflower star that I'd ever seen, because by the time I worked on this in 2022, 23, all of the sea stars pretty much in California had died. They were what's called functionally extinct. So in that area, they don't really exist as a breeding population anymore. The absolutely wild thing to me about sea stars, which is largely what the story also became about, was that they don't always look like what you expect. So this is a baby sea star, actually. These are larval stars. And so they have this larval free floating form. They're not always stuck to a rock or walking around the bottom. They float throughout the water column. So these are the larvae. And this is what they look like when they're moving around in a droplet of water. These are teeny, teeny, tiny. You can see they have these crazy legs. They're spinning around. And so what's really cool is sea stars spawn. So there's a males and females still, just like and a lot of other species. They release, it's like a coral almost, where they release sperm and eggs into the water column, and then those would fertilize to form the next generation of sea stars. And so they have to be in pretty, they kind of do that in close proximity and around the same time. But then once these larvae hatch from, the fertilized egg, these could drift pretty far in the water column to bring sea star populations elsewhere. Once they settle from that stage, we call it settling, so they're floating in the water column, and scientists now are looking at what causes them to settle, like different cues, because they could actually stay in that larval form for quite a long time and then settle perhaps when the conditions are favorable for them to be, like if their food exists. So this is what it looks like. This is tiny, tiny. You can barely see this with your eye. We use special macro lenses to photograph this. And then this is it. You can see this is in a droplet of water, how truly tiny this is. And next to it is actually a sea urchin larvae, which is pretty cool because sea urchins and sea stars, even though sea star on the left is the predator, sea urchin is the prey, they're both echinoderms, and all echinoderms have this like floating larval phage that you would again never assume that was a sea urchin on the right, but that's what it looks like before it settles into this prickly form that you would think of as a sea urchin. These are a bunch of the stars at Moss Landing Marine Lab in just north of where I lived in Monterey, California for the past couple of years. So we actually followed what they called the Cupid cohort. So on Valentine's Day of that year, they spawned these stars. They took eggs and sperm, combined them, and made these baby sea stars to grow up in the lab and hopefully eventually release into the ocean. So this is what they look like when they're in this droplet of water. You can see these are called tube feet. And to me, like I would sort of relate what they look like here to a puppy, because you know how puppies have really big paws. So these tube feet here are kind of way too big for the sea star right now, just like a puppy's feet would be way too huge. And to me, I think they're very beautiful. They look almost like a snowflake. And they kind of just like roll around. What's probably happening here is that there's a high level of cannibalism at this age. So a decent amount of their food sources eating each other. This is, you can truly see how tiny they are here. This is a bunch of them. You can see someone's hand holding this Tupperware here with water that the Sunflower Star Lab in Moss Landing where they're growing these. They have a whole lab now set up, which is pretty cool to grow these stars out. They're pretty big now. So this is what it looks like up close. You can see here it's spreading its sixth leg. And then again, walking with its big puppy feet. So we would follow them and visit them like every week or more to see how they were growing. And they actually grew pretty fast. I mean, it was just over a couple of weeks. They would go from being larvae to being this size, which is still pretty tiny. This is under, we watched them under a microscope, and this is with that same special macro lens. And then this one got nicknamed Hannibal because it ate so many of its siblings. And so at this stage, it's normal for that to happen. I know it sounds kind of scary, but it ate a lot of its brethren. And then it's in here with this urchin, which unfortunately is going to be its food. And Hannibal is still alive. We also went and visited the Mutual of Omaha Aquarium in Omaha, Nebraska, which isn't the first place you might think of for ocean creatures. But what was interesting about this place is that they have a really big cryobank, so like frozen sperm and eggs from different animals. So if they were to go extinct, they would still have the ability to potentially, like with a white rhino or something, like potentially breed one in the future. But this was also cool because they weren't using actual ocean water. And so they were hoping that it didn't have the naturally occurring sea star wasting disease that was in the ocean. So they could be aquaria that are inland might be important for harboring species against disease. So here you can see out of this cryopreserved, so it's kind of like in this almost dry ice type stuff. When you pull it out, these are sunflower sea star frozen sperm. And so when I went there, one of the adults, these extra large pizza size stars, was spawning. It was a female. So they were able to take cryopreserved sperm out of their bank, their sperm bank, and fertilize it so that they can make these baby sea stars. There is like hope in this story too. And so there are still some wild populations left. So as part of this work, I said, I've worked on these stars for a couple of years now and never seen a wild one because they're all gone basically all gone from California. So what turns out that the sea star wasting disease wasn't as deadly in colder waters. So this is in Alaska. up in near Seward in Whittier, Alaska. And this is my first sunflower star. And this is the first one that I met. And you can see I kind of have my camera behind me. I'm just completely immersed in meeting this star for the first time. We also visited a place off of Fox Island in Seward, Alaska, where we were very, very excited because here you can see there's not really any kelp. So they also live in other areas. There's lots of urchins and stuff around, but we were like, well, we hope they're still in the kelp forest too. So we found them in the kelp, and this is a baby one. This one's like a little bit bigger. It's maybe like 2 inches or 3 inches across. So getting larger. And for us, it just shows a lot of hope that these sea stars are settling here. We don't know where the larvae came from. There are some scientists working on that right now from Hakai. And so we'd be interested to know like where they're settling from. But what's really cool is that they actually do exist in some places. This is an aquarium in Seward, Alaska, where they have all of these stars they disappeared so quickly that scientists weren't thinking like, oh, we have to have this whole army of sea stars, right? Just ready to go just in case the whole wild population gets wiped out. They just happen to have these because they were everywhere in the ocean off of Seward. And so to me, this was so exciting to see this level of diversity in color. We actually don't know what causes the different color in these specific sea stars. There's so many unknown questions, which is why I love working on stories like this, because it's just there's endless curiosity that goes into it, and always more stories and always more things you can keep discovering and communicating that can really help conserve this species and potentially like through a sea star help bring back a kelp forest. So in January, people went up and actually shipped some of these stars. Like they packaged them in plastic bags, like if you buy a goldfish, ship them on planes out to other aquaria throughout the United States, so that if this tank got hit by that sea star wasting, you wouldn't lose this massive population. This is the biggest captive population of these sea stars potentially in the world. And so you wouldn't want them to all die from that wasting. So now they got shipped out to places in California and Nebraska, kind of all over the country to try to help save this species. So I just want to end by showing you a little video that shows, this is a time lapse. So this was shot over 8 minutes. But if you think of sea stars as not moving, this is how much they're truly moving. And what I love is how this orange star, when he goes, he like really doesn't, it looks like he doesn't want to like touch the air, like us when there's cold water, when you're trying not to touch it, he's like, oh no, I don't want to touch the air. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I could have sit here and watched these all day. So I'd love to hear if you guys think that they're cute or scary, but I think they're cute.
They're pretty cute. That one's really motoring too. I've never seen a sea star move so fast, even in time lapse. So way to go,
right?
buddy.
Really go.
Oh, Jenny, thank you so much for your passion, expertise, all of this. What a cool gig you have made yourself. And so we are going to dive in with questions. All our classes, if you want to share in the chat, please do. If you want to flick on your mics, I can come to you live. I'm going to give all our StreamYard classes just a second to get their thoughts in order for this. And we'll begin with, how did you get underway with this? Like when did you know you wanted to do this as you were growing up, or did you know when you were growing up? It's a late stage thing. What's the deal?
Yeah, so I always thought that I would be a marine biologist. And so I've kind of ended up being a marine biologist in some capacity, right? Like I have my PhD in ecology. I kind of always thought that I would start a lab and teach, which now I am teaching, but I'm teaching science journalism, so the communication of science. And I think that that's something that's still important to do. But when I was in undergrad and even in grad school, it wasn't as big of a career or like a choice that I knew I could go into. So I would say, like, if you see something or think of something that you want to do later, you don't have to know what you want to do now. And so for me, it was just, I'm still involved in science in some capacity. And I knew that I wanted to work with the ocean, but I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to make it work. And so I think for me, it's a dream. I mean, I've worn this sea star necklace since I was 16. So it's not a new obsession. So I always wanted to do a story on sea stars too, which my first one was only a couple of years ago, but I don't think it's my last one. I'll say that.
I don't think it's your last one either, actually. And so our first question in the chat on YouTube is, when you're going to Antarctica, are you going for sea star stuff? Are you going for something completely different? What's going on?
Yeah, so when I went, I've been to Antarctica twice. The first time was for diving, and it was specifically for kelp forests. So the interesting thing about the kelp forests that are in South Georgia and the Falklands is it's actually the same species, giant kelp or Macrocystis pyrifera, that's behind my house in Monterey. And so it's actually like on the other side of the equator. And scientists are still actually trying to figure out how that happened. It was probably when the ocean currents and the planet looked a lot different than it does now, but it's still the same species. So I was going to see the southernmost population of giant kelp in the world. And then the next time I went, I was working on one of the National Geographic ships. And then I'm going back again this December to do the same thing. So I would love to go back to dive. I just pitched a project to work on the kelp in the Falklands. So we'll see if that comes through.
So cool. And I want to note, as you talked about the islands in that area, I really encourage our classes to look up South Georgia Island. You talked a bit about this. It's one of the most special places in like Antarctic exploration lore and biodiversity. It's just a really, really cool place on planet Earth. So everyone do check that out if you've never heard of it. Very cool. All right. Our virtual elementary school crew, grade 4 through 8. If you guys want to kick us off, I can unmute your mic or you can unmute your mic and we'll bring you in for our first question. Let's see. Hey guys.
Hi. Are there any sea stars in Canada?
Ooh, great question. There are definitely sea stars in Canada. Sea stars, like what's really cool about them, I think, is that they love cold water too. And so in Antarctica, there are tons of sea stars. They like warm water too. They kind of are everywhere. And I don't know which species specifically are in Canada, but I know on the west coast of Canada, a lot of the same species from California, Washington, Oregon kind of extend up by Vancouver. And in the Gulf of Maine, for example, like some of the common species there would extend up to the obviously Canadian part of Gulf of Maine as well. And one interesting thing is that like sea star wasting actually has been on both coasts, but most of the research has been on the west coast. So I'm jumping in now to some looking at sea star wasting on the east coast as well, because it has been like it's not as known as well.
I'm on in Western Newfoundland, and every year the national park here pulls out a whole bunch of animals from the bay and puts them in a mini aquarium where people can see them like that one you featured at the end. So tons of sea stars there. So come on up and we'd love to have you. It would be very fun. Let's head to our Ottawa class, Bell High School, and your buddy, Madam, please come on in, guys, and take us away with a question. Hey.
Awesome. Yulin has a question. What is the difference between algae and plants, and how do algae like kelp reproduce?
Great question.
That is such a good question. So plants and algae are different in a lot of ways, even though they look the same. So I don't know as much about like the tiny, like single-celled algae. They can range from, literally single-celled algae all the way up to what we call kelp are like the macro algae, which is kind of why they might not look like what you would assume would be an algae. So kelp but the really fascinating thing about them is that depending on the species, they reproduce differently. So bull kelp, for example, has a crazy life cycle where like the big one that you see, the sporophyte, is only one like part of its life generation. So it also spends some of its time floating around the ocean as like almost a microscopic spore. So I think that's kind of wild. And then macrocystis, like the giant kelp has sporophytes at its base. And so like the reproductive blades are at the bottom of the kelp. The bull kelp has on the blades, it gets these patches that are about this big, they turn dark, and then those patches fall off before the winter comes and releases gametes from there. And so it's kind of wild, like between the kelps, it's really, really diverse. One other cool thing is that certain kelps, like macrocystis, could live for like 7 years. Bull kelp or nereocystis is 1 year. And then it dies and then grows from a tiny thing all the way up to like 60 feet long in one season. So yeah, the diversity is insane. Yeah.
As an ecologist by background, it's been so long since I've heard sporophytes. So thank you for that in my day. And I want to note for those we've got a lot of Ontario kids today. If you've ever had the chance to visit Ripley's Aquarium, they've got a big kelp forest tank, but it's fake kelp because it grows so fast. It literally grows so quickly that it would take them so much effort to chop it down every single day. They don't bother with that. And they put fake kelp in as sort of a convenience mechanism, which I think is really, really cool. So thanks to our Ottawa class. Robinson Secondary, we didn't have a chance to test your mic, but welcome in Virginia. If you can talk, come on in and we'll take a question. Hey, guys. Maybe, kind of, sort of. I don't think so. I've got this weird, cool metallic noise thing happening, though. That's exciting. See, the joys of virtual broadcasting is that something should go a little awry. So share in the chat. Robinson Secondary, we'd love to hear from you there. Jenny, a question from YouTube. What is your favorite place to dive? No pressure at all.
I will say now that we moved from California, so I just moved back to the Gulf of Maine. So I'm in Rhode Island right now, and like where I grew up. And so I think I'm rediscovering how cool is the place that I grew up, that I kind of, when you're younger, you maybe don't appreciate it as much. So there is kelp in the Gulf of Maine, but I think my favorite place to dive still has been South Georgia, and any kelp forest really. But the kelp forests in South Georgia, like I said, they're like the redwoods of the sea. So if you look at the kelp forest there, it's just like almost pristine. Nowhere on earth I would say is fully pristine, but it's just like the size of the kelp and how cold the water is. It's like water is 32 degrees Fahrenheit or zero, basically zero Celsius, and there's still a kelp forest in it. And there's actually in Antarctica on some of the kelp, there's also these sea stars. Their genus is called Labadiaster, and they look like weird fuzzy octopuses with pipe cleaner legs. Like there's just stuff in there that you would never assume was real. So I think that's why they're my favorite.
No better message than that. That is a really freaky creature. We featured a few over the Ambassadors of Conservation series, but that is up there. So thank you for that.
It's wild.
Jeez. Robinson Secondary has a great question in the chat. So for our YouTube audience's sake, they want to know, you said one of your most challenging dives was off of Mexico. On these difficult dives, and you have these challenges, what makes you keep going and continuing with photography?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So in some of the cold water dives, especially, the first thing to go numb is actually, your face goes completely numb right here. And it only hurts for the first couple minutes when you can still feel it. And then once it's numb, you're good. But the first part to go numb is like right here in your hands. And so if you're just diving, you can kind of like, tuck your hands in or like not use them or make, like squish all your fingers together. But with a camera, which I actually have right here so I can show you, it's really big, but like you have to be able to take and push the trigger here. And so once your hands get really frozen and that finger doesn't work anymore, you can kind of like take your hand and like push it back. But I think what keeps me going is like a lot of these places are really, I can leave this here so you can look at it, but a lot of these places are really hard to get to. It might take a week, it might take a couple of days, it might take a lot of flights or a bunch of boat rides. And I think once I'm immersed in the water, once I am there already, I'm like, I just got to like tough it out and get through this because, I've made it all the way here and now it's time to really get that image. And so I think you can really tune out the rest of the world, or whether you're feeling cold or if you have to pee or if you're tired or whatever, you can tune that out when you're in there. Because once I'm looking through this, that's something really cool. This is a monitor. I think I'm not thinking about anything besides what I'm looking at.
What a beautiful answer. Thank you, Jenny. Geez, that's fantastic. We're going to do a whole other round of questions, folks. So our virtual elementary school, we're coming to you first. Come on in, unmute your mic and take us away, guys. Hey.
So Maddie is wondering if people ever eat the kelp.
Ooh,
that's a great question. So this is like very sad, but there was this amazing company called Akua that made kelp burgers. And so they were like completely vegan, just like the other main ingredient in them was actually chickpea flour and oil and like all these spices. And so they were pretty popular. And they just went out of business and they had other kelp stuff, but there's a bunch of other companies that do kelp stuff. There's one called Barnacle out of Alaska that does a lot of like bull kelp pickles and stuff like that. The main species I would say that's eaten is sugar kelp or Saccharina, which grows here in the Gulf of Maine. And so they do a lot of times the marketing for kelp places shows macrocystis or giant kelp forests, but they're actually growing sugar kelp, which is grown more on the East Coast than the West Coast. The kelp farming is starting to get quite a bit bigger in the US. Of course, in like Asian countries like Japan, they've been doing it for literally thousands of years. So they've fine-tuned it a little bit more than us. But here, sugar kelp, and there's even like a seaweed week in Portland, and like to create recipes and share different ways of eating it. So it's getting there. I don't think that it's picked up in our society the same way it has in some others.
I was going to say, having been to Japan a couple of years back, kelp is everywhere. Like you can't go 10 feet without seeing kelp for sale in some grocery store, convenience store, whatever. Every restaurant menu has kelp. So it's really interesting to see that sort of difference in culture around the world, but exciting to see it coming here. And I hope we get more great companies like that one.
Me too.
Sweet. Our Ottawa class, Madam, please come on back in. Take us away. Hey, guys.
Is there any other places that's losing a lot of sunflower starfish, like California is?
Yeah.
It's missing a lot of sunflower stars?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they used to occur from Baja, actually, all the way up halfway out the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. So if you think of that like chain of islands that comes off there, and they are disappeared from most of their range now. So I think like Baja completely gone, California almost completely gone. You'll see one like every once in a while, maybe if you're really searching and you're really lucky. Oregon and Washington have some, and they've actually started this lab. Jason Hoden has been releasing some now, like under specific circumstances, like in cages and stuff, to try to put them back out. So there are still some. There's some in Alaska, but it's like 90% were lost. So they're mostly gone. But in a lot of places, I don't know that they'll ever come back in the warmer water, like in Baja, where the disease was more intense.
I really appreciate that you spend so much of your time talking about the disease because, we hear about pandemics in our own population, of course, as humans, but there's been so many big diseases for animals in the last few years. White nose syndrome bats, we talked about with Kristen Lee earlier this series. Wasting disease, we've never actually featured. And it's wild to think that you have an entire ecosystem of melted creatures on the seafloor. It's disheartening. It's very odd. It's freaky. And it sort of is quite amazing that we found out the cause of it. We're working to understand more about this. We're working to prevent things like this. But I really appreciate you sharing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I first learned about it actually through Drew Harvell, who's a pretty famous marine ecologist. She wrote a book called Ocean Outbreak that I read when it first came out, I want to say 2018, 2019. And she wrote, each chapter is about a different ocean pandemic, basically. And so I think it was interesting. I read that just before the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was cool to see not cool, but interesting, I guess,
I know
to
what you
see
mean.
pandemics, the parallels between the pandemics in the ocean and I think both are maybe predicted to get stronger with climate change too.
Yep. We cover pretty much every conservation story somehow links back to climate change nowadays. It's really changing pretty much everything on this planet in every way. And so I'm glad we've covered it a lot in our Ambassadors of Conservation series. Jenny, speaking of that series, we are wrapping it up and time flies when you're having fun. So we are nearing the end of your broadcast. So I want to encourage all our classes, check out the Ambassadors of Conservation series. Every one of these programs is on our YouTube channel in a special playlist. You can check out all the 10 shows together. Really, really cool stuff. And I can't encourage you enough. Check out ifthenshecan.org. So much to explore there. And you have an amazing website and social media presence. So if people want to see more of your amazing photography and follow along with your adventures, they can go there and do just that. Before we wrap up and bring in our classes to say thank you and farewell, is there any final message you want to leave us with before we say goodbye?
I think if you have the chance to dive into kelp forests, for sure jump in. But also, like I said, if you don't see something exactly what you that looks exactly like what you want to be when you grew up, don't worry, because maybe that will exist when you're ready to start a job in however many years.
So many people in this series had no idea that their job would exist when they started off as students. And
there you go.
That's changing so much more rapidly now. So honestly, if you're excited about something, if you can speak about it passionately, and maybe that's animals, maybe that's math, maybe that's history, follow along, see where the world takes you, because there's a lot of really, really cool opportunities out there. Exactly. Jenny, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to bring in our classes audibly to say a big thank you and farewell. And if you're at home on YouTube and you want to scream and yell and annoy the principal too, you have our permission. Please do. But our virtual elementary school, Madam Fweeze's class, thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now, and we'll see you all